right, welcome to today's episode of Tomorrow's Leader, where we dive deep on all things leader related to leading yourself and, of course, leading other people. So I remember a time I was at a gym I had been going to for a long period of time, and there was this guy, Anthony, that I just saw all the time. Like literally every time I went there, we just happened to be kind of on that same schedule. And so, I go to the gym, I want to work out. I'm really not talking to people too much, but every so often, Anthony and I would talk. We'd, catch up on stuff, talk about workout routines, whatever it is. And I remember it was probably 6 months into to knowing him. And he says one day, I'm like, "Hey, Anthony, how you doing, man?" And he says, "My name's not Anthony." And I'm like, "What do you mean it's not Anthony?" He's like, "It's Chris." I'm like, "It's Chris. What are you talking about? I've been calling you Anthony for the last 6 months." He's like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why didn't you ever tell me?" He said, "I did. I told you a few times at the beginning, and then you just kept calling me Anthony. So I just let it go." And I'm like, "Seriously?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm seriously so sorry." Like, if you've ever been in that situation where think of somebody you've known for 6 months and you know them by name. Like for me now to unlearn his name is Anthony, that just changes the game. I'm like, I'm going to have to keep calling you Anthony. But anyways, I just felt so dumb. I'm like, how could I miss that? He told me multiple times. I don't even know what I was thinking. Like, does that sink in? And just, did he look like an Anthony? I don't know what the case is. So in any event, I bring this up because at that point, I thought I was a really good listener. Like I just, hey, why is it? It's not that hard to do that stuff. And, listen is easy enough to do, but I wasn't really doing a good job of listening, right? And even though I thought I was, and I see this problem with leaders all the time. It's one of the biggest problems that leaders face. And most of the leaders, and we all know leaders that actually are not good at listening, but they don't think that they're bad at listening. They actually think that they're really good at listening. So I see this as a fatal flaw with tons and tons of leaders. And here's what it looks like. It looks like a lot of different things. We see leaders that ultimately aren't paying attention, right? How many times have you talked to somebody? And one of my big pet peeves is if I'm somewhere and I'm actually in a conversation with them and they're looking over my shoulder, like we're in some kind of bar, restaurant, or school, whatever, and they're sitting there looking over my shoulder as though they're waiting for somebody who's better to talk to or more interesting, right? I know they're not really listening to what I'm saying, or they're definitely not making me feel like I'm important, at least at that moment. That's little stuff. Now, I've seen leaders do some really, really overt things that send a signal to that person that, you know what, I don't really value your input. Now, I've talked to hundreds and thousands of leaders. In reality, I think if you polled 1,000 leaders, 999 of them would say listening skills is an important skill for a leader. In fact, to really lead a high-level organization, not only do you have to be good at listening, but you have to be good at taking action from the things that you hear, right? It's not just opening your ears, but it's actually doing something about it. But one of the biggest signs that a leader actually is not a good listener is they don't do anything with anything that they hear. So how many times have you given feedback and you feel like it falls on deaf ears? I had a horrific moving experience recently, and I'm going to save that for another episode of the podcast. I'm going to tell the full story because there's tons of lessons in there. But I had a survey. I had a survey. Somebody called me to give me a survey actually today. And I could tell they were asking, they said, "Hey, we got 10 questions to ask you. Can you rate on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being best, 1 is worst." And now, granted, I think most of the time when companies do these surveys, they're usually getting an 8, a 9, a 10. So he asked me the first question, how was the experience when they picked up your stuff? Now, it was a horrific experience. So my answer was 1. Now, this guy, I might as well had said a 10 because there was no reaction on the phone. All he did is go right to the 10. It wasn't like, "Wow, really? Wait, a 1? Do you realize it's 1 is the worst?" There was no reaction like that. It was just, he kept going. So he went on to the second question. And he said, "How was the experience of transporting your stuff?" I said a 1. Again, no reaction. He just went on to the next one. He said, "Okay, well, how thoroughly do you think they packed your stuff or took care with your stuff on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best?" I said a 1. I literally gave a 1 at every single one of these. And then he said, okay, at the end, overall, how would you rate the experience? 10 being you'd refer our company. 1 is you'd never ever want to deal with us again. And I said a 1. I said, you might be surprised to hear that, but a 1. And then he was wrapping up. I said, wait a second. Why did you call me? What are you doing actually with this information? Is this going to go anywhere? Because what I gave you was horrible feedback, and I'm not hearing any kind of response or any indication you're going to do anything with it. The most frustrating thing that people can deal with is companies or leaders that don't do anything with any kind of feedback. Okay, so if you're a leader of an organization, you're a parent, you're running a social club, you're running a team, whatever, one of the things you have to do is put yourself in a position so that people know you want to get input and feedback from them, right? That's one of the most important things. You got such great brain power in your team. And oftentimes the people in your organization will have the best answers. The leaders that think they're the ones that have the answers all the time are usually the ones that fail over the long term, maybe not the short term, but over the long term. And again, I see this as a fatal flaw with leaders. Now, some leaders have a style that puts out a message that they really don't want any kind of advice. Now, I will give you an extreme example. I was at a conference once. Now, this was a Fortune 100 company, very large, well-known company. And the CEO was in the front of the room and in front of an entire group of maybe 500 leaders. One of the attendees had asked at the end of his speech, raised his hand and asked a question. I don't remember what the question was, but he asked the question, and the CEO at the front of the room, now again, there are 500 plus people in the audience. After the question, the CEO looked, you could tell he was frustrated maybe with the question, and he said, you know what? That's the dumbest effing question I've ever heard. That is the dumbest effing question I have ever heard. Now, you could hear a pin drop in this place. Okay, but think about that. What's the message? Now, I don't think it was a dumb question. I think it would have stood out as a dumb question. What was really alarming was his reaction to it. So think about this. How many other questions do you think came up after that? None. Nobody raised their hand. Nobody wanted to be treated like that. Nobody wanted to be shut down like that. So leaders sometimes, now that's an extreme example, right? But leaders send a message that's really clear that they don't want advice oftentimes, that they don't want other people's opinions, even though they will stand up in front of their organization and say, yes, I value all your opinions. I value your advice. I value your input. We always want your new ideas and suggestions. Some companies will say that to customers and clients. We want your suggestions. Please give us your feedback. And the feedback goes nowhere. Okay, you've heard me talk about my leader that I'd had that we used to call the black hole book, because he'd write everything, you tell him problems and issues and things like that, and he'd write it in a book and nothing would happen. And then you go tell him something else, he'd write it in a book. He was really good at writing in a book. Some leaders don't even write anything down, right? You're talking to them and you can tell they're not even listening to your answer. Okay, nothing. They're not paying attention. They're not asking questions. They get maybe sometimes that glazed over look. And it's sending that message that, you know what, I don't really care what you think, right? I say this because I've seen so many leaders deal with this. I've been in organizations where that's happened. At times, I know I have not been the best listener either, and it's affected my ability to perform as a leader, and it's affected the culture of the organization. Okay, when people ask, I had somebody who asked me, to become comical, asked me the same question over and over again. And it was something he was asking me my age, and we were talking, it was a business setting, and he was saying, how old are you? And I told him my age, and blah, blah, blah. And like 10 minutes later, how old are you again? And I told him my age. And literally no joke, about an hour later, he said, how old are you again? And I said, you know what? I'm actually still the same age I was a few minutes ago. So I don't know what's happening when I'm telling you, but I am 48 years old, whatever. So bottom line is, leaders, people in general, do all kinds of stuff that sends the signal that I may be asking you a question, I don't care about your answer. Okay, take it from me. I've seen it. You don't want to be part of that club of leaders that only cares about what's going on up here and not in the brains and minds of other people. Jack Welch, one of the most successful CEOs of all time, ran GE and routinely would tap into the brains of people working on the assembly lines. He got some of the best ideas. One of the most brilliant ideas they ever had in that organization came from an assembly line worker. And the funny thing is the assembly line worker said, you know what, you've had my hands for the last 30 years working for this company. That was the first time you ever tapped into what was up here. Okay, take a lesson from the great Jack Welch. So, quick stuff on the importance of listening, one of the most impactful and important and critical skill sets that a leader could have. But don't just say it, don't just talk about it, do something with it. People give you feedback, do something with it. If it's feedback you're not going to do anything with because there are certain reasons, then communicate that. That's okay. Hey, I took in what you said. Here's what we're going to take some action on. Here's what we're not. And here's the reasons why. But I still appreciate your feedback. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to keep getting more and more feedback, more ideas, more input. Otherwise, you close the door to that and it's just you. You could have 100 of the best brains in your organization. You're never going to tap into it. So, lesson for today on listening. Hopefully you listened to today, huh? If you tuned out of this, then okay, we're defeating the whole purpose of this podcast. So enjoy it, share it, like it, give comments. Make sure you give me suggestions on future topics that you want to hear about. And look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks, everybody.